Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Canadian federal election prediction series. So, I am a bit late this week, which is going to make the next update, assuming I can manage to pull it out on time, which I won't for sure, because I'm busy Wednesday, but I will do my best. Maybe try to push it out Tuesday instead. I'll make the next update a bit lame, because it'll be fewer days, but considering most of the polls come out Monday, Tuesday anyways, I don't think that will have really any meaningful impact. So let's look at changes from last week to this week. So Liberals gained a seat from the Conservatives in Nova Scotia, gained one from NDP in Quebec, gained one from Conservatives in Saskatchewan, and gained one from Conservatives in BC. That's really all the changes. I'm expecting... So like 2 weeks ago, there was a relatively big bump for the Liberals, then a big bump for the Conservatives, then it Conservative bump went down a bit. I think we're going to start seeing things evened out in a short while because we're not having polls coming out that are changing the education variable. Because principally, these big bumps that keep happening are because, for example, the last update we had an Angus Reid poll that gave me more informational data on voting attention by education level. And then an update before that, it was Ipsos who gave one of those. Leisure and Nanos, the two most common polls that I've been using in these uh, predictions, because they're the most prolific publishers of polling data, don't release that data. They do record it, but they don't release it publicly, which is frustrating to me because that is useful data. But without that data, when a poll comes out from that has that data, since it's more rare, it has more of an impact. So things are going to start settling. And actually, I think I can even spot from here what the week-to-week fluctuations will probably be looking like. Will probably look like Conservatives and Liberals flopping seats in BC, the one seat in Saskatchewan, the one seat in Nova Scotia, maybe seats in Ontario, New Brunswick. But I think that's where you're going to see most of the week-to-week fluctuation happening. I think the NDP, looking at the numbers, they're really not doing very good. And actually, bear with me a second. If we go to these numbers, we see the NDP has slid back down. I think it appears that last week, November 11th, this does say November 18th, but this has been updated to November 22nd. So I'll just fix that right now. So it looks like the November 11th update was anomalous for NDP. They went from being low to being a bump tie, and they went back down low again. If we look here, their trend line has decreased a bit. And you look at distance from trend line, this point here is about as anomalous as this point here. So it's with the current data selection, so it's kind of hard to say, but the correlation, while it's relatively low now for the NDP, is still significant enough that if last week was an outlier, this would be still a reasonably strong trend. I just cannot... We won't really know for a couple weeks. It's still about a correlation of 0.5, which is still in the realm of something that means something. If we look at the Liberals or the Bloc or the Green Party, those correlations are just completely washed out and are almost certainly meaningless. I think it's pretty clear with this Liberal trend that they're all over the place in week-to-week fluctuation, but they're on a slight downward trend here. And who knows, maybe the next update we'll see them a bit higher up, but I doubt it. And actually, I think I have a causal theory for why that is unlikely to happen. So if I just switch back here for a second, so we look at this, and this is just to give a geographical perspective. Basically everywhere, like Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, BC, Alberta, even Nova Scotia now, are starting to get quite a big resurgence of COVID cases. And whereas the first time that clearly caused a valley to the flag effect, I think we're going to see the opposite, because essentially the first one was an unforeseen disaster that no one could have prepared for, and now we're going into it again, and it's like, well, all the government policies that were in place before seem to not have worked, or are currently not working, because a lot of these places like Ontario and Quebec and BC never really reduced restrictions significantly or meaningfully, and they're still getting huge resurgences right now. So I think we're going to see a lot of the sympathy for government response collapse, barring some novel new strategy that actually works. Because what we're seeing is government officials talking about going back into lockdown again, and Canadians are more compliant than our southern neighbors, but I just don't see that being a long-term effective political strategy, especially considering there's very little scientific evidence that lockdowns will actually help meaningfully restrict the spread. So, at the rate things are going, because if we switch back to this other screen here, one day I'll have a better setup so this is not as choppy. If we see this, so, oops, sorry, the Liberals are sitting around like 36.2, and over the last week, the gaps went from like about 2 points to, I don't know, 1.8 points. I think we're going to continue seeing like the 0.2-ish shift towards a tighter vote. Like I think we'll see in the next update, barring something wild, I think we're going to see the Conservatives doing better, Liberals doing worse. I think actually this might see a resurgence to the NDP. So for a while they were going down. I think they might start going up as Liberals or as NDP Liberal swing voters start ditching the party. That said, depending on how an enemy Paul does, she could absorb that vote, because NDP Liberal swing voters could easily go Green Party Liberal swing voters, because they're very similar platforms. Bloc looks like they have regained their ground in Quebec pretty firmly, so I don't think they're going to go much places, though I think the stronger Conservative showing in Quebec, sitting here around 18 points, is going to be pushing the Bloc to a different, pushing it away from Quebec City itself. So if we look at this map again, so in Quebec, like the Conservative part of Quebec is like right here, around Quebec City. Trois-Rivières is a competitive city for the Conservative Party, and then it's a bunch of area north of Quebec here. The other party that's really competitive there is the Bloc, and I think the Conservatives are going to slowly replace the Bloc in those regions, and probably grow up along this coast. So I think we're going to see the Conservatives gaining ground up along here. In the long term, with these numbers going in Quebec, like if the Conservatives manage to get, they're sitting at like 12 seats here. I think if they pull up to like a 20, 22 point support in Quebec, I think you'll see them pick up another 2 or 3 seats, all from the Bloc. But since the Bloc support is still going strong, I think we're seeing as the Bloc's migrating and taking a lot of the Montreal suburbs. And I will not be surprised to see Liberal vote shares also going down in Quebec as Conservative vote shares go up. Not because the Conservatives will be taking seats from the Liberals per se. There are a couple seats that can't think of the names on top of my head, but are conceivably competitive for the Conservatives in the next election if they gain a couple points in Quebec. Montreal area, that's not really competitive for the Conservatives. Maybe one seat in like a really good election. But there's just, you need, when you're breaking into an area as a political party and you haven't had much success there in the past, it takes several elections to go somewhere. You need to have good candidates on the ground. You need a lot of funding. And you need to have a message and a pitch that attracts those voters. Like if you look at third parties that break out and actually are successful, like Coalition Avenir Québécois, the current governing party of Quebec, that went from being like a niche fourth party in, I believe, 2008 to being majority government in 2018. And that's because they had one election where they had a bunch of candidates who clearly must have been interesting enough to gain seats. And the progress of gaining seats let them get more donations, attracted more interesting candidates, grew bigger parties, so they got more seats, and then in 3 elections they became government. The Green Party kind of has the same, for lack of a better term, same fundamental problem. They're a small party, so they don't attract a lot of the donations, a lot of the charismatic candidates, because frankly, in most of Canada, if you are a left-wing politician, unless you are opposed morally or on some key party position, it's hard to argue against joining the Liberal Party. Obviously, many don't join the Liberal Party because they have moral or key political issue differences. But that's a hard sell because a lot of politicians, frankly, do not care. A lot of politicians are there because they are power-seeking narcissists. And that is just a fact of life. I think in Canada, that is less well seen. I think the media has not done a great job of talking about the kind of shenanigans that politicians are pulling off in Ottawa, or even state legislatures. But the same problem happens. You see it a lot in south of the border because their news is much more keened in on it. But it just seems like this cruel twist of reality that most of the people attracted to it are just unscrupulous people. It's unfortunate, though. I think the internet age is going to start seeing that shift a bit because the internet political candidacy has more of a authentic, more of a grassroots feel to it. So I think we'll see a lot of the excess of like the 90s, early 2000s, the tail end of the pre-internet political age going away. You can even see that in 2019, where the internet and the easy access to it really influenced the campaign. Definitely against both Trudeau and and Scheer in 2019. And I think going into what I'm assuming is going to be a April 2021 election, barring. No, it's probably going to be April 2021. I think we're going to see that really hit Trudeau hard, and barring the Trudeau campaign being able to pull out dirt on O'Toole, that's just going to tarnish him. It seems like O'Toole is going to be able to handle it quite well. Blanchette, obviously, did it amazing in 2019. I think he's going to do fantastic in a hypothetical 2021 election. I don't have much faith in Singh. I've talked to a lot. This is anecdotal. I've talked to a lot of left wingers in Halifax area that I know on a personal level, and they're all pretty dissatisfied with Singh. A lot of comments he's made, a lot of positions he's fought for, And I think overall, the NDP party is quite suffering from his leadership in particular. He seems to be the worst excess of the internet politician who cares more about the fame than actual success in politics. He's, if you look at like south of the border in the U.S., you have politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's like the same kind of thing, who seems to be more obsessed with the fame and the starlight of their positions and their moral outrage than actually doing something productive. That's really what seems to scream to me. And I don't know enough about Enemy Paul to really comment on her on this, but that's where she has the room to sneak in and just gut the NDP. Particularly if we look at this in BC, there's several seats around Victoria area that I think the Greens could be quite competitive in, gain easily a couple seats if, uh, for lack of a better term in or phrasing, if Enemy Paul can show she's a more productive candidate than Singh, who can actually get things done other than just moral outrage. Well, we'll see. I don't expect to see. I expect the next couple updates into December, over Christmas time into January. I don't know if they'll be very productive updates. I don't know if there's going to be much movement in the polls, much significant movement, barring some unforeseen travesty or like disaster. I think we might see a slow shift from liberal to conservative. So if we go back here to this spreadsheet here. So right now, the conservatives are about 34.4 to the liberals 36.2. I think we could see that narrow down to like 35-35, which is still liberal advantage because of how strongly conservative votes are sucked up in Saskatchewan, Alberta, even to a certain lesser extent Manitoba. They get a lot of votes in these provinces, but they don't transfer a lot of that vote potential into seats because, mind you, Saskatchewan and Manitoba are slightly overrepresented, but Alberta is significantly underrepresented nationally. Whereas the Liberals get a lot of seat movement in Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland, which are all overrepresented nationally in seat totals. I don't think we'll see much positive movement for the Conservatives in those areas. But so when I say hypothetical, bringing the Conservatives up to 35 points, I think that might be the BC, them actually gaining the lead in BC, maybe sitting at like a 34 margin, Liberals trailing down to 32 margin, and then a few points across the rest of the country, maybe bringing Saskatchewan, Alberta over 60 kind of thing. But I don't foresee any party being in winning position other than the Liberals. So if we go back to here for a second before I just wrap up my comments. So Liberals are 158 right now. With the NDP and to a lesser extent the Green, Liberals have a functioning majority government. At least, I'm going to call it a functional majority government until Singh does not cave to Trudeau on a major issue. But if we look at from a conservative standpoint, because they're the only ones who have any real potential to gain ground, where can they gain ground here? Obviously, pick up a seat in Alberta, Saskatchewan. Pushing it, I think they could gain 2 seats in BC, maybe 3. So let's go with 2 for more conservative estimate. That gives them 4 in Western Canada. Very unlikely they'll gain more ground in Manitoba, the way the districts are shaped up. In a really good election, they could probably get an 8th seat in Manitoba, but I think that's very unlikely. So let's say 4. There's about 2 seats that they could, right now, they could not comfortably, they could competitively pick up in Ontario. So that brings them, what, 6? Maybe, I have to recall the numbers. I believe it's only 2 seats that are competitive in Nova Scotia. So 10 seats nationally. They're pretty saturated in New Brunswick, and actually very, very, very voter efficient in New Brunswick. We're pretty saturated. They could pick up maybe one more seat in New Brunswick. So let's say they pick up one more seat in New Brunswick. They pick up 2 in Nova Scotia, 2 in Ontario, and then 1 in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and 2 in BC. All from the Liberals, because best case scenario for their worst case scenario for the Liberals in a sense. That gives the Conservatives 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 more seats to 135 versus 149, which still puts the Liberals in a functional majority government. You see the advantage the Liberals have right now. That's not to say that they're guaranteed to win a re-election. I don't even think they're likely to win re-election. Because if we have the hypothetical April election, which is 5 months or so from now, you look at some previous elections, even 2019, 5 months before October 21st, it looked like Scheer was going to win in a landslide. He was up 8 points in the polling aggregate. Turns out he was up 1 point on election day. That's not good numbers. And depending on how things go, the Conservatives could, like a best case scenario for the Conservatives here, they could probably gain 4 in BC, 1 in Alberta, 2 in Alberta. But we're going best case here. 1 in Saskatchewan, 1 in Manitoba, 10 in Ontario, 2 in Quebec, 1 in New Brunswick, 4 in Nova Scotia, 25 seats. That would be their best case. I'd give them 151, and that would give them a minority government with support of the Bloc. Theoretically, I suppose the NDP could also play balance of power there too. So it is conceivable, and you might scoff at the Liberals or the Conservatives picking up 10 more seats in Ontario, but that's not that unreasonable. If I suspect any Conservative who has to win, it has to be more than 50 seats in Ontario, at least 50 seats in Ontario. There's just too few seats in the rest of Canada to pull out a functional minority government unless the NDP has a huge increase in seats, which I just don't think is going to happen. So I guess a better way to say that is the Liberals have to lose a bunch of seats in Ontario. Really, I think opposition parties would want the Liberals to be less than 60 seats in Ontario if they're talking about winning the election. But that is just my my hypothesis going forward. My gut feeling still has it that Newfoundland here is going to actually surprise everybody the next election, but there's no data for it. Mind you, Newfoundland's polled very sporadically, so it's very hard to get data for it. But my gut feeling is there that a good Conservative campaign could cause a big upset in Newfoundland. But we'll see. Definitely watch out for it on election day, though. Otherwise, if you like the video, please like, share, subscribe, comment below your thoughts, any predictions you have going forward, or you want to query my mind on what you think any party's chances are, or where they could gain seats, or what their possible seat, what's it called? Hypothetical ceilings and floors to parties. Let me know. Otherwise, hope you all have a great Sunday, or if you watch this on another day, great that day too.